Super Mario Bros. Is one of the most iconic video games of all time, beginning the Mario Brothers adventures in the Mushroom Kingdom. Given its legacy over the past 40 years, Nintendo has continuously re-released the NES original in some way, shape, or form, whether as a straight port or a reimagined remake. This video will attempt to cover every port of Super Mario Bros. From the 1985 original to even the absurd references and remakes. There will definitely be some I miss, and if I do, please put them in the comments. With that being said, here we go. Super Mario Bros. NES Famicom. To begin, we obviously have to start with the 1985 original. It put the Super in Mario Bros. Releasing in Japan in September and the US in October, with the European version releasing the following year. And among the 17 launch titles, Super Mario Bros. Would go on to become the most famous and successful out of them all. As was common for many games being localized from Japan, they were either heavily censored or made changes to make sure a Western audience could understand them. Fortunately, gameplay-wise, the US version avoided this. But according to external sources, in the European version, the enemies have an extra pixel to their hitboxes, making the game harder if you can believe that. No, what I wanted to focus on was the difference in box art between versions. In Japan, it was a common practice for game packaging to feature some kind of key art designed by the game's illustrators. In Super Mario Bros. Case, its Japanese art was designed by series creator Shigeru Miyamoto, but when it was time for localization, the US version was changed to be a screenshot of gameplay. My theory as to why this was done essentially boils down to differences in culture. Japan is about demonstrating the beauty of a product, whereas America is about making a product look as cool as possible. And as an American, I can attest to this. Duck Hunt Bundle and others. Over the NES's life cycle, Super Mario Bros. Would commonly be bundled with newly purchased NESs. When the Famicom disk system released in Japan in 1986, Super Mario Bros. Was one of the games rerun as a launch title. This was done because games released using the disk system's floppy disks were cheaper for consumers and to counter piracy. They also allowed for higher data capacity, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As for how it pertains to Super Mario Bros., the biggest changes made were strangely to the minus world. When beaten, the game counts it as beating the game, unlocking hard mode. However, one of the most famous re-releases was the 1988 2-in-1 Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt compilation, packaged with the NES's action set. Nowadays, anyone looking to purchase the original Super Mario Bros. Will find that the Duck Hunt bundle is one of the most common versions available. Besides being essentially a 2 for the price of 1 re-release, what the action set was best known for was the NES Zapper, which was meant to simulate a duck hunt. Yet at the same time, I guarantee you most kids didn't use it for what it was intended for. Later in 1990, Nintendo did the same thing, only this time bundling Super Mario Bros. In a 3-in-1 with the aforementioned Duck Hunt, but now including world-class track meet. Lovely. One thing I like to focus on with this version is the cartridge art. On the key art that highlights Mario, the artwork is a total copy and paste of the Japanese art, except they removed the mushroom from Mario's hand and recolored him in his fire flower form. To top it off, the background image, tell me not, resembles the skyscraper from Mega Man 2. The Game & Watch. If you watched my Mario Land video, in the backstory segment I explained the Game & Watch. Now, before the Game Boy was released in 1989, Nintendo was still producing games for their little handheld, the Game & Watch, and in 1987, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch. However, to any of you who have played Super Mario Land, you'll know that while graphically, Super Mario Land has not aged well, it was a faithful adaptation of what was established on the NES. So how do you make a Mario game on technically inferior hardware? Well, you make a whole new game essentially. While it might have the name Super Mario Bros., it is nothing like the NES version. It still has the same modus operandi of a Mario game. You still have to platform over bottomless pits to save Peach from Bowser, except the kicker is the entire game is an auto-scroller, which, if I can be honest, are my least favorite levels in platformers. However, despite the antique presentation of this game, a big compliment I can give it is that all the worlds pull a Mario Land by being out there with their settings. World 2, for example, is set in a gym, which, to be fair, running and jumping is pretty common in these places, and despite appearances, Mario is a very athletic guy. Imagine if your local gym had a Mario obstacle course. It doesn't end there, though, because in 1987, Nintendo released a special limited edition version as part of a tournament with only 10,000 units being produced. It should be brought to attention, however, the special edition did update Mario's design to fit with the NES sprite. Although, ironically, during Mario's 35th anniversary in 2020, Super Mario Bros. Finally made it to the Game & Watch, officially after all that time. The Game & Watch love doesn't stop there. To further empty the wallets of collectors, there was Super Mario Bros. Nel Sonic Game Watch. Out of every version of Mario Bros. I mentioned in this video, this one I think takes the trophy for the strangest out of them all. The game is only 4 hours long, and your goal is to ascend the castle to save Peach from an evil wizard that's never seen in game. versus Super Mario Bros. This next version on the surface may appear to be an arcade port of Super Mario Bros. However, its lore runs deep once you dive in. After the video game crash of 1983 and a canned deal with Atari to distribute the Famicom in North America, Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi conceived the Versus system as a way to garner interest for the NES. And despite the market crashing, arcade games were still popular in the US. Funnily enough, in Europe, when it was shipped over, it was actually how Super Mario Bros. Debuted in Europe. A clever marketing move if you think about it. Back across the pond in America, Versus Super Mario Bros. Went on to become the 13th highest grossing arcade game of 1986. To include a bit of finality, Versus would be Nintendo's final arcade game before leaving the business. There's a funny story behind this version. I can imagine everyone watching this video knows how an arcade works. You use coins as a cover charge to play the game. Back in the homeland, arcades were installing Famicoms into arcade cabinets as early as January 1986. Nintendo, catching wind of this, threatened perpetrating arcades with legal action such as a fine or even prosecution. Some things never change. Though some Japanese arcades were still hosting the illegal versions as late as 1987. Despite the arcade version being discontinued, it still lives on as part of the Switch's Arcade Archive collection released in 2017. In terms of the game itself, it plays as a harder version of Super Mario Bros., such as altering levels to be more difficult, increasing the total amount of coins for a 1-up to 200, and new levels which went on to be featured in Lost Levels. Which, speaking of, all Night Nippon. While Lost Levels is accredited as Mario Bros. 2, in all seriousness, in my eyes, it's another version of Super Mario Bros. For the most part, the game plays the exact same as the original. However, to separate itself from its predecessor, there were numerous quality of life changes, such as updating the background graphics and new sound effects. The game is, in all honesty, a harder version of Super Mario Bros. Certain levels were directly taken from the previously mentioned Versus Mario and All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. Now, All Night Nippon is a different story. Technically speaking, it is an alternate version of Super Mario Bros. And the focus of this section. Many of its stages are directly taken from the NES version. World 1, for example, plays the exact same as before, but this time it's set at night. The graphics were borrowed from Lost Levels, and at the same time, many of the assets including the Starman and Toads were altered. All Night Nippon essentially was a mix of Super Mario Bros. And Lost Levels. The crux of my argument comes from the fact that everyone watching this video speaks English and has heard the story of Mario 2 USA a million times. When Lost Levels came to the West with the All-Stars collection, Mario 2 USA was still given the honorary title of being Mario 2. And Lost Levels as a hard mode of Super Mario Bros. Though nowadays, Nintendo has given Lost Levels the official title of Mario 2. And what's funny is that depending on if you ask an American or Japanese person, you'll definitely get different answers. Nintendo World Championships. The next version is a version that saw a rebirth recently thanks to it being an obscure collector's item. That being the version of Super Mario Bros. From the 1990 Nintendo World Championships on the NES. In 1990, Nintendo held a championship in 29 cities across the US, with the winners able to receive a multitude of prizes. The championship was divided into 3 categories based on the age of the contestant, with the winner of each category getting a $10,000 savings bond, a geometric convertible, and a gold Mario statue. How the championship worked was players were given a special cartridge which contained modified versions of the games they featured, Super Mario Bros. Being one of them. Your goal was to collect 50 coins as quickly as possible, you were given 99 lives, and it was meant to test the player's mastery over the game. In 2015 and 2017, Nintendo would host 2 more championships, with the series making a sudden comeback in 2024 featuring even more classic NES games. Though Super Mario Bros. Wouldn't be what it was remembered for, instead it would be the elusive and rare gold cartridge. Super Mario All-Stars. Next is the Mario game to rule them all. All of you watching this have been waiting for this moment. Super Mario All-Stars. All-Stars is a compilation of the previous 4 Mario games updated for the SNES. It began when Miyamoto pitched a Mario collection that would fill in the gap between Super Mario Kart and Yoshi's Island. To get the obvious out of the way, Super Mario All-Stars is one of the best games on the SNES. The graphics add much more detail and character than what was on the NES, while still familiar to those who played the original. All-Stars is a perfect example of how to pull off a faithful remake. The level design and physics remain unaltered, while new additions like a save feature and new animations were added in. All-Stars proved to be so successful and popular when it was released in 1993, Nintendo the following year re-released the game again, bundling it this time with Super Mario World. All-Stars plus Mario World did come with some updates. Yoshi was added to the title screen, and Luigi's Mario World sprite was accurately updated. There was even a limited run for the Satellaview broadcast, a satellite modem add-on on the SNES that only saw release in Japan titled BS Super Mario Collection. How it worked was, during specific periods of time, a certain Mario game from the collection would become available. Your goal was to beat the world before the timer ran out and before the next broadcast. BS even included a world map and Toad House to make it more in line with recent Mario games. There would even be voiceover at certain intervals, with Mario and Toad interrupting to pitch in their commentary. Finally, for the 25th anniversary, Nintendo released All-Stars yet again, this time for the Wii. And it was heavily criticized for being a lazy cash grab, which, yeah, it was, and not including Super Mario World. At the very least, that same year we got Galaxy 2, so you win some, you lose some. To return to the SNES, the All-Stars version is by and large considered the definitive way to experience classic Mario. And they're not wrong. Not only is it a faithful remake, you're also getting every major classic 2D Mario, which is more than enough. Super Mario Deluxe. For this next section, we're jumping ahead to 1999. Up until the release of New Super Mario Bros. On the DS, every subsequent 2D Mario would either be a remake or a port meant to bolster a new console's game section. Nintendo in 1988 released the Game Boy Color, and as you can expect, it allowed previous Game Boy games to be played in color on top of releasing its own exclusives, one of them being our next version, Super Mario Deluxe. Exactly as I explained in the Mario Lands video, Mario would once again be the frontrunner for the new console, and in 1999, Super Mario Deluxe released for the Game Boy Color. Where Deluxe separates itself from the version I'll discuss in a bit was there was actual effort to make it stand out compared to the original in All-Stars. The first and major change was a ton of extra content like lost levels and a challenge mode where 8-bit Yoshi grades you on how well you performed. This meant that when you beat the main game, there was a ton of extra content readily available, increasing the total playtime. Deluxe is not perfect, however. The screen resolution is not the best. It was done to fit the Game Boy Color screen, and while it accomplished that goal, it resulted in some of the worst screen crunch imaginable. What Deluxe did achieve at the end of the day was actually try to carve its own identity during a time when 3D Mario was getting the spotlight. Yet, it didn't stop Deluxe from being often forgotten nowadays. The major reason is because the Game Boy Color had a short 2.5-year lifespan before being replaced by the GBA. It did, however, leave behind a legacy, being the first handheld Mario game to be in full color and was a precursor to the Super Mario Advance series. I guess you could say Super Mario Deluxe is like a diamond in the rough. Unlike this next version, NES Classic. Super Mario Bros. For the GBA is a part of the NES Classics edition. For those of you who don't know, the NES Classics were straight-to-cartridge re-releases of the original NES versions. This version doesn't have any of the extra content Deluxe had, and I have nothing more to say about this version. Virtual Console and Ports. For this next section, I'm going to speedrun Virtual Console ports in games in which Super Mario Bros. Was included as extra game mode. To begin, in 2001, Nintendo released an enhanced version of the first Animal Crossing for the GameCube. As a way to market as well as increase interest, Nintendo and Famitsu magazine partnered together and held a sweepstakes competition where lucky people would receive a memory card unlocking Super Mario Bros. As an extra game mode. It never saw release outside of Japan, however, if it did, it was likely going to be released for the GameCube's e-reader. In case you're wondering, in the international version, the only way to obtain it is by cheating. Now here's where I spitfire all the Virtual Console ports. So, without further ado, we have the 2006 Wii version, the 2011 3DS version, the 2013 Wii U version, a playable demo in Super Smash Bros. Brawl / Wii U, another demo in Amiibo Tap, one of the games included in the NES Classic, and finally the 2018 Switch Online version. Honestly, the only thing I took from this list is that the Virtual Console is superior to Switch Online. Red Wii version. However, there was one version I didn't mention, the limited edition Red Wii version. It was created to commemorate the 25th anniversary, and people who bought it were given a free copy of the 25th anniversary Super Mario Bros. It still played like the original, except the question mark blocks were altered to have the number 25 on them. However, the kicker was, it was only available in Japan and Australia. And I have to say to my friends down under, you're very fortunate hanging out in the outback playing Super Mario Bros. With your Red Wii while your copy of Galaxy 2 is sitting on the shelf. That's pretty cool. NES Remix. I promise we're almost done. The next two versions are retools that appeared in the 2014 NES Remix. The NES Remixes were similar in theory to the Nintendo World Championships. They were classic NES games divided into challenges alongside specific modifications to test your skill. After completing a stage, you were graded and could use the rewards you gained to unlock other stages or trade it in an Amiiverse. That's all well and good, however, a year prior to NES Remixes 2's release, there was the glorious Year of Luigi, a year dedicated to the ultimately better Mario brother. When NES Remix released, one of the challenge games included was the poignant Super Luigi Bros. To those of you who have played Super Mario Bros., Luigi was only playable if two-player mode was selected. In the first game, Luigi was only a sprite swap of Mario, but Lost Levels and Mario 2 USA would introduce Luigi's unique characteristics such as his ice physics and higher jump. This is worth mentioning because in Super Luigi Bros, Luigi carries over these mechanics. It doesn't stop there, as the game is also a mirrored version of Super Mario Bros, and instead of moving left to right, now you move Luigi right to left. I know that's not revolutionary, it is a neat way to make the game different, like when you're playing the final castle and you have to mirror the order of pipes to reach the final boss. Even the ending is slightly different. When Luigi arrives to save Peach, he finds that Mario beat him to it, which kinda sucks because Luigi was unable to put the laundry out to dry. Yet even though Broken Heart sucks, Luigi objectively has the better princess. Later that year, the third edition of NES Remix, yes it was a trilogy, released. Ultimate NES Remix. Exactly like its predecessor, it came bundled with its own version of Super Mario Bros. This time it was Speed Mario Bros, with its unique mechanic being a sped up version of the NES version. And that's all it is really, though technically the name Speed Mario Bros is rather appropriate. Super Mario Bros. 35. Finally, the last version of Super Mario Bros. Is Super Mario Bros. 35. Anyone who unfortunately wants to remember 2020, Battle Royales at the time were at the peak of their popularity. Nintendo, seeing this trend and wanting to celebrate Mario's 35th anniversary, for a limited time, players who were subscribed to the Switch's online servers could download this game and compete with other players in Super Mario Bros. However, Nintendo, deciding to be a bit cheeky, added new additions to make matches more chaotic. For starters, in the center of the screen would display your game, and the other screens were players currently in your match. If you defeated an enemy, you would send that enemy to the player you were currently targeting by using the right analog stick. That meant that if one player was doing really well, other players could gang up on him, changing the course of entire matches. At the same time, there was another game mode called Special Battle where players would play certain levels with special events to again add a bit of chaos. There was even an item roulette you could spin at the cost of 20 coins to hopefully give yourself some assistance during a match. As is common in Battle Royales, when you lost all your lives, you were sent back to the title screen to start again, and in order to win, you had to be the last one standing. I don't know why Nintendo made this a limited time game, though I say this as somebody who skipped out at the time. It's basically multiplayer Super Mario Bros. With a BR twist, and it's cool that even Mario got in on the Battle Royale train. To conclude, it was a ton of fun getting to research the multitude of versions of Super Mario Bros. All of us know the NES original and All-Stars, but I guarantee some of us didn't know the Animal Crossing version or the BS version, because I sure didn't. Super Mario Bros. Is the most recognizable video game of all time, and it will continue to be so. Also, I'm gonna hold myself to this. Switch 2 will have a Super Mario Bros. Port because if there's one thing you learned from this video, it's basically tradition at this point.